Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Championship Motorsports VWSC Historic Series, the wonderful historic series. Probably my favorite series here that CMS has, other than, of course, the modern series. But the historic series mirrors the modern series, brings plenty of action through. And this week, we are here at Reims or Reims, depending on what side of the world you want to try to pronounce it as. You'll probably hear me say it Reims the rest of the night because, well, I don't particularly enjoy saying Rons too much. That is just the American in me coming out, and we're going to stick to it. But of course, it will be myself here, Bradley Dalton. I'll be joined by Zach Sweeney for the first time here with the VWSC Historic Series. And we've kicked Paul off for the night to go watch some soccer. And we've got James Parfit here. And yes, I said soccer. Again, the American in me coming out. But let's talk about the track that we're looking at here and the schedule of this night. It is going to be Circuit Reims here, the 1.2 hours here on the 6th of July. From there, the next race you will see will actually be a hill climb at Kappa Karate, and that should be fun. And then Kappa Diena coming to the 10th of August, and then the 17th of August is Goodwood, and then from there we go to the Nürburgring all the way in October. You get the whole month of September off, and then we'll go to Monza, we'll go to Bridgehampton, we'll go to another hill climb with the Provence Alps, and then we will end in the City of Love in the wonderful city of Paris, all the way on the 7th of December. This track is, of course, the Circuit of Reims or Reims. We'll go back and forth on the pronunciation a bit, and it's a deceptively simple looking little track. It's 5.16 miles, 8 kilometers. It's built in France in 1926. We're running the 54 to 72 layout here in the 1964 Historic Series. And yes, it is genuinely only 5 corners. It's deceptively simple. We'll see how our drivers get on with that from there. Of course, the keys to the race today: possibly rain in the area. Is there going to be any rain? That is the $1,000,000 question. You need to hit the top end on the straights, and you really have to nail your hairpins as this race goes on. That's going to be the big key to things here. Of course, the Div 3 strategy: you really need to maximize that top speed and manage your fuel. The Corvette Stingray, the Shelby Daytona, those are the cars to beat, and we anticipate probably 1 to 2 stops, 20 to 27 minutes on a fuel run. That will be the big question on how they do. And then, of course, the Div 1 and 2s, you're looking at the 904 and the Alfa Romeo Giulia. Those are the cars to beat, and it's about 20 minutes to a fuel run, 2 to 3 stops. And again, you want to maximize the top speed. You got an 8-kilometer track. Top speed is king here. Now, let's go over these points. Let's start with the Div 3 AMs as it stands. It's Jerry Chen and George Angelides here. P1, P2. Barry DiMarzio there in 3rd place. You can see the gaps are a little bit spread out there, but Dave Kors in P4 with only 12 points isn't too far behind. John Mayer there in P5, and then Zakic in P6. Peter Meyer in 7th. Tom Mountjoy in 8th. No points for 7th and 8th, respectively. And then, of course, Flying Kiwi Racing Ferrari there with Meyer and Chen are going to be the lead team, with the Scuderia Cavalli Ferrari 250 GTOs of Angelides and DiMarzio in 2nd place for the teams. In the Div 3 Pros, we are going to be looking at Bradley Sellers, JT Tammy, Magnus Dahlgren, your top 3, and notice 2nd and 3rd is separated by just half a point there. Ethan Funk in P4, Nicholas Kirsten in P5, Ross Smith in 6th place, Wouter de Bruin in 7th, Timon Subic there, Alexander Scholes in P9, Mike Bell in 10th, and then, of course, Jason Whited, Brian Hall, Kyle Vessa, Tom Lane, Angus Tong, Dave Kors, Nicholas Hillebrand, Mikael Ramos, and Alexander Scholes there all the way down the line. Why is Alexander Scholes on there twice? I don't know, but it is the Racing Ferraris, the ME Racing Ferraris there in the team lead, with Smile Power Racing and the Shelby Daytonas in 2nd place, and the Rookie Monsters in the Shelby Daytona there in 3rd place. Scuderia BWOT Ferrari and Storm Rider Racing Shelby Daytonas, your 5 teams there in the Div 3s. Now, let's talk about the Div 1 and 2 AMs. Eric Monet there in the lead with Adam Gray in 2nd, Michael Locke, James Bowders, Santiago Dancourt, Tom Mountjoy, Luke Goodlife, Filippo Marazzi, Fernando Ferraria, Pavlel there in P10. Then from there, it's Mathis, it's Stephen Miller, it's Philippe Ducardi, it's Oscar Dancourt, it's Mateev Treshev, and then, of course, it's the Mistral Targa Porsche 904s in lead, with Reptile Racing Porsche 904 in P2, and Gazolinks Porsches in P3 for the teams. Now, let's jump to the Div 1 and 2 Pros. This is going to be the long list here. We'll go through the top 10, and of course, make sure you point out your favorite driver all the way through. 31 drivers overall. It's Aliko Businik, Dan Hurley, Warlock, Becky Ely in third place in that Lotus, which me and James have had some discussions about the Lotus. Zach, you and me will have some conversations later. Cameron Barker, Reese Gardner, David Junt, Dan Kirby, Ben Borman, Eduardo Benica, and Oliver Day, your top 10 in the Div 1 and 2 pros. And then you can look through there, find your favorite driver out of that long list of 31. And of course, it is the Joy Motorsports Porsche 904 GTS in the lead with the Alpha Austrias in the Alfa Romeos in second place, with Mike Bell Motorsports also in an Alfa Romeo in third place. CMS Pro Alfa Romeos in fourth, and of course the Fatigio Monsters Lotus in P5 on the team standings there. And that is a long list. You look all the way down, there's not a lot of a gap there in the Div 1 and 2 pro standings. That's really what kind of catches my eye, catches my mind, and I really notice. But that is going to be the roundup. That's the intro. Let's bring in the new guy on the block here, Zach Sweeney. It is going to be a good evening for you. A classic Brit here, showing off some cars in France. And I know that football is on, but thank you for joining me for some motorsports here this evening.
Yeah, that's definitely the one I prefer when it comes to the sports. It's definitely the motoring one. England also typically tend to be a bit better at the driving than they do the kicking the ball. So that definitely does help our case just a little bit. I'm going to jump in and talk for a bit, because you've just done an absolute mega job of getting through all of that, I have to say, Bradley. Really good stuff, it must be said. But yeah, we're here at the Triangle with a couple of twisty bits, and it should be good. We're probably going to have a lot of slipstreaming. Of course, that's to be expected. Probably going to be a very oval dynamic race. Of course, these guys actively going to have to brake at each of their hairpins, but that makes it even sort of more skillful, because, you know, going in and coming out of those hairpins are going to be so vital, because realistically, as a driver, they are the only places you are going to be able to make time up relative to your competitors on pure skill. Strategy as well. I assume no one's really going to want to be at the front of a train for very long, is to try and save that fuel as long as they possibly can. So it's fairly simplistic looking from the outside in at a top-down view of the track. Like, well, that's an easy track. You know, what's to talk about? But the dynamic, the strategical dynamic that's going to be going on here today is going to be one to watch, and hopefully it's going to be a nice 72-minute run.
Yeah, 72 minutes here, 1.2 hours. And of course, we don't have Ross Smith here to bring in to try to get some info about the cars coming up. We can maybe try to fake him into thinking that Mr. James Parfit wasn't here, so he'd actually tell us what next year's cars are. I tried to get him to tell me last time, and he didn't, and so he won't. And I really need to figure out how to get him to tell me. But he did tell me. He's going to tell me before he tells James, so that's the important part. There have been some discussions of potholes on the front stretch after the Dunlop Bridge and near the pit entry. So as a sim racing driver, that can add a little bit of a dynamic as a driver when you're looking, because in sim racing, you don't typically think of potholes and of issues like that. You're going to be thinking everything is nice and tidy and smooth, and, you know, I can just drive on pavement. But Storm Gang have done a good job of just adding that little bit more realism, and there's those little potholes. Zach, as a driver, how do you handle that? Is it just you're going to have to program your brain to remember that's there? Or what do you think the guys are going to do about those potholes being there?
Well, I mean, that's what I love about sim racing, first of all, because it's not a game, it's a simulator. So to have that extra level of immersion is fantastic. Of course, to whack them onto the circuit and have the drivers have that element to deal with. But you're right in saying that, you know, it's an extra element and it will affect the car. Right, you go through that dip, that sudden compression in real life, you know, it could very much sort of pop a tire, damage suspension components, ruin the geometry of the wheel. In the sim as well, it can cause the car to become unstable, bottom out a little bit, particularly at the rear if you get it at the wrong angle, and send the car a little bit hayward, particularly at speed. So you are going to have to be very, very careful. Now, if it's a nice little pothole that's not as long as the width of the car, you can just put two wheels over it and hope that you are able to drive over it. But if you're trying to go side by side, maybe it's going to be a case of trying to maybe give your opponent a little bit of a nudge onto that pothole to sort of deter them a little bit, or they might just have to drive around it as such, sort of find a way around it. If it's on the racing line, go off the racing line and come back on. It all depends on driver and obviously the size of the pothole itself. One thing I know for certain, however, is they're not going to want to hit it.
Sort of an a la carte Monaco run is what we're thinking. So I think it'll add a little bit. And I'm kind of looking at the cars. I'm trying to see. I don't think Storm Gang have made any major updates here going into this race. I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I will let everyone in the chat correct me. If you are in chat, good evening to you. Of course, there in the YouTube chat. Stacy, hello. Kim is there. We also, of course, have our fun reporter, Mr. Reese, who will give us some behind-the-scenes info as the race goes. So we'll see what happens here. Of course, Ollie has been on a winning streak, 3 races, 3 wins. So Stacy pointing out that could be something interesting coming up. We do, of course, have some penalties as well. Luca Tavernavi has a stop and hold 10-second that is left over from Spa. Neil Wood has a 15-second stop and hold that is left over from Spa. Ali Karjalahadi has a 15-second stop and hold from Sebring. And then Santiago Dancourt has a race probation from Spa. Eduardo Bonica with a 15-second stop and hold from Le Mans. Tony McGoffin has a stern warning, and Diego Castro with a stern warning. So a few penalties here. We'll see how things go. Ross Smith out on track with a warm-up, and this is where for me the historic series shines, because you see the car ahead there sliding around a bit with Ross, and that is where these cars really shine for me, is that they're not what I think of when I think of a modern racing car, and you sort of look and you expect the cars to really be grippy and hold on. These cars, you just have to slide. You have to go. We were watching some drivers get them about 15, 20, 25 degrees sideways through the corners. So that's the fun of the historic series for me, Zach, is just these cars, you have to muscle them around the entire time.
That's what I love about them, and it's why I love what the guys at Storm Gang Simulation do, and obviously with the VWSC, also the Sim Racing Revival, and all those historic championships. It's so important to celebrate the old, so that we can sort of really appreciate the new and appreciate the old in sort of a hand-in-hand harmony, because the evolution to get from where we were to where we are today, these cars are fantastic. No power steering, no assists, such raw machines, no aero. I think back in the day potentially crossed by tyres, not entirely sure as to when they sort of introduced the radials, maybe was a little bit of a later date. And as Ross Smith has just proved, the brakes as well are terrible. Back in the day, they were thinking, how can we make the car go really, really quick and really powerful and really loud? And then realize, oh yeah, we also need it to stop and turn. That is also kind of helpful. And that's where the real muscle driving style has to come into things, particularly sort of in the more American cars, the Corvettes and the Shelbys, because again, it is all about putting your foot down and having that raw American muscle propel you down the straight. But when you get to the corners, it's about using that power in a productive manner, maybe trying to get a little bit of a power oversteer to counteract that understeer, just to get that rotation, really being clever with the weight distribution of the car, because you can't rely on aerodynamic grip. You've really got to rely on the mechanical grip that you've got, and then also sort of try with the ballast as well. So it is a very difficult car to drive. Difficult cars, I should say. We have got a multitude of different manufacturers out there today, as you'll see, with a variety of chassis. But you have got to be really careful, and it is a very niche driving style, but one that once you do nail is so fun. There is nothing better than getting into an old car, turning the traction control off, turning the ABS off in the assists, and just giving it some. It is magical.
It really is, and I will say I've driven a variety of cars in real life, and comparing them through to what Storm Gang have done here with this historic series, it's very well off. I've driven, variety of different cars. I've driven a C2 Stingray in real life, and what they've done here with this Corvette C2 Stingray and the Div 3, it's very one-to-one, I have to say. It's very on board. So shout out to Storm Gang for everything they've done here. 5 minutes left in warm-up, and Zach, I'm gonna ask, I know if James was in warm-up, he'd probably just be putting it in the wall and trying to figure out what he would be doing here. As a driver here, what is the idea with this warm-up session? Of course, we've had practice before. They've had several weeks to practice this track and really nail it down. When you go to the warm-up session, you've just got a few minutes before 1.2-hour race where it's all there. What is your goal in the warm-up? For me personally, it's always just get the blood flowing. think of it like a warm-up before you work out. You know, you jump on the treadmill and you walk a little bit. You do a couple of just simple push-ups, squats, air squats, whatever it may be. What are you doing as a driver?
I mean, you effectively want it to do a warm up, and James, behave yourself because you are getting old, mate. I'd be surprised if you can do a squat. He's in our ear, by the way. You guys can't hear him at home. We're slating each other in the commentary booth. It's remarkable fun. If you want to get involved at JP Broadcasting, very much do. It's always a bit of banter, or don't. I don't know. But when it comes to warming up, I always say, particularly sort of on iRacing and things, I compare it to sort of revising for an exam. Right? You've had 2-3 weeks before to practice. You know, that's your revision. You very rarely get a lot of value from cramming it into a 10-minute session, right? There's not going to be a lot of knowledge you can retain. There's going to be very few things you remember. And in essence, you are just going to overwhelm yourself with information. And that translates into the sim. But with it being historic cars, with them having a very niche driving style, with it being sort of a track where there's only 5 corners and therefore only 5 opportunities to make up time, you really want to nail each and every single one of those 5 corners. And they're actually quite generous with the warm-up session. You get a decent chunk of minutes, which means that you do genuinely have a little bit of value, a little bit of time to get out there, warm the car, warm yourself up and get going.
Yeah, and classic Le Mans start here. We're already underway, ladies and gentlemen. This is no hesitation, no going. It's an hour and 12 minutes of action, 1.2 hours here coming up. And Le Mans style start, they did not hesitate with it. And this is where we get going underway very quickly. Tom Lane has jumped out to the lead there. That is the car right on the right of your screen. We are focusing back on the number 93, and that is going to be the wonderful Bradley Sellers, who is running that Shelby Daytona in 3rd place. But Tom Lane very quickly out in the lead here, wants to get away, and everybody behind, well, it's just jockeying for position here, starting at night, of course, and we will transition through the day as this hour and change goes on. So don't go anywhere. Enjoy the racing, but it is Tom Lane here up in the lead, and we continue through. I don't see anything crazy happening, and as I say that, Woodard de Bruin hard on the brakes, is trying to defend off Bradley Sellers. Bradley Sellers trying to defend off Nicholas Christen there on the inside in the Ferrari. Ferrari versus Shelby. I feel like I've seen this somewhere with the Le Mans start, and we get underway, and it is Shelby, 1, 2, and 3.
Looking very, very well poised indeed. And of course, Tom Lane living in the fast lane out in front. 1.6 seconds clear, and we're a minute and a half into this race. It's fantastic, but what is going to be the long-term consequence of this fantastic start? How much fuel is he going to use relative to those behind him, or is he just willing to get going? This is side by side. Of course, Tammy trying to hold off Nicholas Kirsten. They're going to be running for quite some time before they reach the next braking zone, which is, in fairness, coming up. They are going to settle themselves into single file, also side by side in that fight for second. Valter de Bruyne versus Bradley Sellers. They're going to do battle for second place as well. You can see, of course, just trying to nip his way on the inside as that 93 machine. The 19 gives him the space, but the up and under is there, and that is how important exits are at this triangle.
Again, this is a deceptively challenging track for as simple as it looks on paper. When we showed you that paper all the way back at the beginning, that track map, you probably looked at it and said, well, this is just a triangle. This is for James Parfit, Pocono. This is a triangle track. It shouldn't be that difficult, but this is probably going to be a very difficult track for them here today as we go. Slipstream is going to play big in the Div 3, I feel, because look at this. Woodard de Bruin trying to hold off Bradley Sellers, JT Tammy, all of them just down the Slipstream, the Shelby, and the Corvette Stingray appropriately, with Ross Smith a little bit further back there. You can see once you kind of lose out of touch of the car ahead, the time will very quickly bleed away. You'll start to build a gap there, and you really have to gain that back under braking, but no ABS, no traction control. These cars, you really got to be gentle on that brake pedal. We jump back here to Cameron Barker, who is trying to hold off that number 90 back of Kirby, and they are trying to run through. This is Div 1-2 battle, and the pace difference, I don't know exactly what I'm expecting on the pace difference, but it is probably looking so far about 15 seconds pace difference here. 222 from Tom Lane was the first time in our Div 1-2 leader, put in a 240. So really about 18 seconds. I'm a little bit off on that as I try to do quick mental math here. Dan Kirby, Cameron Barker still battling it through. Div 1 and 2, this should be a feisty battle all the way through as well. I do want to point out the Div 3 AMs. It is George Angelides and Jerry Chen are our 2 Div 3 AMs that are going to be battling it out. You see them P9, P11 respectively, as the 79 slides through Cameron Barker, trying to hold off Dan Herlock and goes through. But Div 3 AM, that should be a very competitive battle because it is just 2 cars that are in that fight. But meanwhile, Div 1 and 2 are going to keep action all the way down the straightaway.
Yeah, exactly, and this is going to be the dynamic that we really have to settle into as the race develops. I mean, we are going to see positions change, track position at this stage. Does it mean a hell of a lot? Probably not, because again, like with any oval, you swap places, they stay behind you, then the next straight you swap places again. The only lap that's realistically going to matter for track position is when we get into that final 5-10 minutes of the race, after all the pit stops have been settled out. Right now, it's going to be a case of getting into a rhythm, finding that groove, staying in touch with everyone with the slipstream, and also saving some fuel, lifting and coasting as much as physically possible. When it comes to positions, it's not really going to be too big of a problem. That's not going to stop them, however, as the Lond is going to go for a move on the 47 of Bosinic into the braking zone. It's so tricky because you've just had the last sort of minute of nothing, and then you're suddenly expected to slam onto the brakes from 150 mile an hour.
Yeah, and there's tricks to doing that. There are, but it's very few and far between as we ride on board here with Lalonde trying to chase down Bosinic here, and you see trying to look for some sort of a move. They do, of course, have those braking markers there to the side that they can look at and try to use, and it's very helpful, especially at night. But look at this. Look at just how close they go. They go under the Dunlop Bridge here, come up over the hill, and now they've got to break through. This is where things are going to get interesting with Herlock up in the mix as well. You see that Bosinic makes the run. Can Lalonde follow through? It doesn't look like it is kind of settled in there behind, and now Dan Herlock kind of acting like a roadblock there to separate that battle as we go through. Bosinic there in the lead of them. Ahead, Kirby Barker still battling. This is the battle, again, just Div 1 and 2 that is battling. Div 3 has really kind of opened up their gaps. Nothing too crazy going on up there as we run through, and only 6 minutes into this race as we go. JT Tammy, Ross Smith, as I say, there's nothing going on in Div 3, and this is where the action is at. JT Tammy, Ross Smith, here we go. It is Ross Smith there to the inside, wanting to make that pass work, but of course, as soon as you pull out into that air, you can lose all momentum.
Yeah, exactly. It is like just hitting a brick wall of air, because that's exactly what it is. Ross Smith is going to look to the inside. Of course, this is Chevy versus Shelby, and this is the battle we were expecting. The two American muscle machines of the 1960s doing battle. That is very sketchy. I think he might well have overshot the corner. He has. And that's exactly what he done in practice.
You would think that he would have learned from practice, but it's, again, deceptively difficult, Zach. Deceptively difficult is all I can say about this track.
Yeah, it is. I mean, again, you don't give it enough credit. It's easy to underestimate it. This is a decent battle. Ross Smith versus Magnus Dahlgren, of course, the 0-0, just settling himself back onto the circuit, but still 65 minutes left to run of this race as Tom Lane continues to stretch that advantage at the front, 3 wide nearly as they cross the timing line. But of course, they reach the fast right-hander here that you really are just feathering the throttle, trying to balance the car through. And again, the swaps of positions, how much do they really mean at this stage of a race? Because there's so much of it left to run, pit stops and everything still. How much value is there in fighting for track position?
I wouldn't say a lot, if any, honestly, at this point. I think the big thing is they need to just make sure they're keeping in touch with the leaders, because if anything happens in a pit stop, they need to make sure they're there to capitalize. And of course, we are expecting at least 2 pit stops from everybody, I would think, as we go through, or at least 1 full pit stop, possibly a shorter splash and dash near the end. We'll see how the drivers go and see if our pit stop strategy calculation is right here as we go through. And again, they continue to battle. The more they battle, the more it lets the top drivers get out of, get out of arm's reach, and they need to really just settle in, slipstream with each other, and try to just keep that gap to the top 5 closed up.
Yeah, exactly. Just sort of, again, very sort of similar to what we'd have in a NASCAR race or an oval race, that sort of dynamic where bump drafting and maybe not necessarily bump drafting, depends how tolerable these cars are, but in that same sense of working together to make that gaps close. Because again, at a circuit like this, it's going to be that much more tricky to make that time up yourself versus a pack that's going to be in the slipstream. Of course, sometimes your hand is forced because the slipstream is that strong, like in this case between Dahlgren and Whitted. Of course, the 85 looking to the inside in the Shelby. And that is going to be him trying to find his way through, but brave enough on the brakes. It is going to then be the 89 that stays in front in that Ferrari, looking very, very nice indeed, must be said. An hour and 3 minutes left to go off the back of the hairpin, and we've got a slipstream train already starting to form. However, Tom Lane is running very, very nice indeed.
Yeah, Tom Lane with a good jump. This is going to be a replay here. This is going to be John Meyer, and we'll see what John managed to do here and running down under the Dunlop Bridge. What has happened here to John? As we see, looks like, yeah, same thing that Ross did, just completely missing the braking zone.
Yeah, and again, it's easy to do that. You've just had over a mile of straight running. The brakes are going to be cold. You're going to be a little bit sort of shaky as well. I mean, it's been a while since you broke for a corner. Don't forget it's dark. The track's cold, so you can see less. The tyres naturally have got less grip as well. So it is going to be very difficult. And it's a circuit similar to the brakes as well. The tyres aren't getting a lot of load into them. There's no lateral load for a long time, so that internal carcass temperature naturally is going to be a lot colder because they're not being loaded up. They're not being forced to stay warm. They're going to be nice and cold, which again limits the braking power they've got. We have got a battle for the lead. Kirby versus Barker. This has been a battle that's been raging on for quite some time, and a swap of position for the Alfa Romeos. And to be honest, I'm sure Cameron Barker's probably not too mad about that at this stage. Gives him an opportunity to sit and chill in the slipstream for once.
Yeah, and honestly, that might be the thing you need. Sometimes it's better just to sit behind someone for a little bit. You don't want to be the car always being attacked. Sometimes you want to sit in the back and just follow another car, see what they're doing different, and it gives you something to focus on, especially on a dark track as we go through. Moyne with a 2:34.421 new best time there in the Div 1-2 AMs. Of course, only 2 cars in the Div 1-2 AMs here today as we go. I know with the Div 3 AMs, there are several drivers that are not here today for a variety of personal reasons. So it's kind of narrowed the field out a little bit. And of course, remember, we ran Le Mans a month ago. And Le Mans, of course, in the historics was very similar to just flat out for a while and then hard on the brakes they had to go. So it's something that tends to follow here as we see Dan Herlock, Busenik, big slides going there. Busenik to the inside with Lalonde around. Now Dan Herlock needs to try to capitalize, but this sort of style of run flat out for a while, jam on your brakes, run flat out for a while, jam on your brakes, tends to just be something that these historic drivers have to naturally get good at. They've got to be comfortable because I feel like every track we've done, Targa Floria, historic Spa, of course Daytona, and even Le Mans, that's kind of a staple of this sort of track setup.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of the historic circuits are very sort of straight line speed orientated. I mean, look at classic Spa, classic Le Mans. You've really got such heavy reliance on straight line speeds and not so much on corners that we do in the modern day. Have to say, the classic circuits, it can be a little bit touch and go. I mean, it's a historic league, so I don't want to say too much about historic circuits. In my opinion on them is to not be completely sacked. But when it comes to the racing, we love corners, right? Because that's what overtakes get done. Don't get me wrong, you can still have some good racing because it's a whole different dynamic and a huge learning curve with the historic circuits. But it's not what you're familiar with. It's not, say, a very technical circuit like an Alton Park or something like that, which, don't get me wrong, has a lot of history. But historically, it's also got a lot of corners as well. But that, that's a discussion for another day. And each circuit has its own challenges. Even in the modern day, we've got circuits with a heavy focus on straight line speed, take Monza and things like that. For example, we have dipped under the 1 hour mark. Lalonde and Herlock battling away, riding on board, of course, with the Alfa Romeo. Plenty of battles going on. It's just going to be a while until they actually begin to matter.
Yeah, this is, with Silverstone being this weekend, I think the best way to equate this, as James has said in my ear, and it's very much, I was trying to find a good phrase for it, is DRS straight. It's essentially just you're riding the slipstream here at this point, and sometimes it's not a bad thing. It just sometimes that in terms of racing, it's do that and just try to capitalize on any errors here as we ride on with Dan Hurlock. You see that 65 there running a bit wide. You've got to watch and be careful with the car ahead. Make sure you're paying attention to what is happening with them. And of course, that number 65 ahead. What car is that actually? I didn't think we had a 65. I might be wrong there as I say that, and I'm sure that somebody will tell me in my ear what I'm looking at. And that might have been Adam Gray actually going through, if I'm not mistaken. But now we get to run around and go through. But yeah, it's, you know, really when we hit the historic series, it's about consistency. It's about just, you know, even though it's, you know, straight break, you got to just be consistent all the way through.
Yeah, consistency is key on circuits like this, right? I mean, we've seen already how easy mistakes are to make, and how, you know, costly those mistakes can be, particularly at a circuit like this one, where there's such a heavy focus on straight line speed. So any corners you do get is, oh my word, already on grass. That is so stupid. Single digit IQ driving there, it must be said. I don't know who pushed who where or whatever, but that is not good at all. That is absolutely just this early on in the race. You cannot be pushing drivers onto the grass, and you don't really want to be driving yourself onto the grass either. That is, yeah, not good. I've got to be honest. That it's aggressive, don't get me wrong, and in the end there was no harm, but that could have so easily gone so wrong so quickly.
Yeah, that's you know, I always say with these endurance races, it's a long race. There's plenty of time, you know, for you to make your race, and there's plenty of time for you to break your race. And well, to be frank, if you're going to do something like that, you're going to break your race more than you're going to make it. There's no sense in that happening at all. As we jump back up front here with Div 3, Bradley Sellers here trying to hold off JT Tammy there, and Wouter de Bruin actually is who we're looking at ahead. The gap with JT Tammy is 10 seconds there. That's a considerable gap to make up this early on, considering we're only 15 minutes into this race. That is a huge gap that we've got to make up early on, and we'll see, you know, can JT Tammy, Ross Smith start to close that gap. But as it sits, Wouter de Bruin and Bradley Sellers are just, you know, kind of running with each other. And I will say Bradley Sellers doesn't look antsy to pass. Looks like it is just a case of follow the leader here at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that risk versus reward strategy at the front for the leader of Tom Lane, I mean, it's exactly that, right? It's a risk versus reward. Granted, he gets a really good jump, 3.5 seconds clear of the pack, but he's doing everything by himself. He's running the engine at full capacity. I doubt he's doing much fuel saving. He's having to take the full brunt of the air that's coming at him, so the engine's having to work harder for the same result. He's not getting an easy ride in slipstream. When it comes to the pit stops, what is that deficit on fuel going to be? How much longer is he going to have to fuel up? Is he going to have to take a second stop where others maybe don't? Whereas obviously Wouter de Bruin and Bradley Sellers fighting for P2 and P3 are going to be swapping places, lifting and coasting, able to work together. Maybe that 3-second margin that Tom Lane is able to get thanks to pushing hard early on is going to be very quickly negated by the time we get to the stops.
Yeah, I think the pit stop strategy is really what's going to be interesting to me, because these cars, while they are similar performance-wise, there's pretty significant difference in terms of the fuel tank stuff. The Shelby Daytona, of course, has the smallest fuel tank, so even though it is a Shelby 1, 2, 3 as it sits, they could be on a fuel problem, and that may be what they need to do, is just stretch their legs early on here. So we watch Dan Hurlock again is just right on the back there of Busenik and is just trying to find a way through forward, just right along. I like riding on board with these cars because you really get to see how much counter steer they have to put in. Even in a right-hand corner, they're having to put in some significant left-hand turn to keep things moving. It's very, very interesting to watch here. As we go, they've got to just force the way through, hold on to it, keep everything going. Really just got to go slipstream through. But again, Dan Hurlock doesn't look near as antsy to pass as I figured he'd be here as we go down the main straight.
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to that point of working together, doesn't it? Sitting in the slipstream, giving him a bump draft. I mean, I will say that is running very close, and the margin for error is very slim. But if he's happy to sit behind and work with him, just look at the gap. I mean, that's virtually nothing. He is basically pushing him. And again, that is the way to go, because they've got a gap to the front two of Kirby and Barker. And I'm sure both of them, these two, 3 and 4, want to go and catch that to be within a shout for the lead. With an hour to go, or just under an hour to go, it's going to be so much more difficult to go and catch that gap if you immediately settle for third and say, oh, well, they're already 2 seconds in front, let's just fight for P3 instead. No, Herlock is doing the right thing. He's pushing Bussing to try and get after them, and already they're seeing the rewards of that. They can visually see the top 2 and that gap closing, and it's only 1 second between the trains. So very quickly, a 2-car battle for the lead will become 4.
Yeah, and this 4-car battle, this is where things will start to get kind of spicy as it goes. And of course, Div 1-2 is Alpha, Alpha, Porsche, Alpha. So we'll see how this battle continues through. Dan Herlock, I think it's interesting if you watch him through turn 2 up into the right-hander there of Viraj Muazan into turn 3. He was very just gently tapping the brakes. And again, you see Ross Smith hard on the brakes there into that deep right-hander of Viraj and trying to make a pass go. So he does very, very well just to work the car around. It's interesting to me to see how these historic cars on sections where, you traditionally see a modern car and you would think, yeah, that's just a flat out all day easy corner for any car to make. These historic cars have to work it a bit more. And I will say it makes for some interesting viewing because, again, that's where you get the counter steer in. That's where you get all of the performance or lack thereof coming in for these cars as we go. 52 minutes, 10 seconds now to go. And all of our cars are still on track as it stands. 26 entries here in this race today, and all 26 still standing. I haven't seen anybody retire out yet. And that has been the big key so far is everyone's surviving. We're coming up pretty quickly on our first round of pit stops, I would imagine. And we'll see, how the pit stop strategy goes. Again, we touched on it. The Shelbys have the smaller tank, so I would think they're going to stop earlier. The C2 Stingrays have the largest tank, so they may be going, if you're JT Tammy there, you may be thinking a little bit on strategy to just stretch things out a bit longer and see if you can't just take advantage of not having a pit stop here. Nicholas Kirsten, we check out here in P7, who is trying to chase down Jason Whited there in P6, and you see is just slowly and quickly. So we'll see what happens here. And James, you've been in the background. You've been kind of just hanging out here as we see Nicholas Kirsten try to get a pass. I see pit stop starting. How's the race been for you back in the background?
It's been all right. I think the thing is, with this circuit, the way it's set out, as you said, it's very Pocono-esque. It's very triangular-based. So the problem is obviously these guys are literally just been following and following and following. And a few have missed their braking points down into the hairpins, which is what we've seen already. But I think overall, they're really not pushing to make the moves that they have been here. And you can go back down to the Dan Kirby, Cameron Barker positions, where they've literally been following each other. The guys behind Busenik and Herlock, they've also been doing the same. They haven't really been getting that aggressive move done that you would expect people to do. As I say, we've still got 50 minutes to go. There's still a lot more time on the board. I'll come back out in the pit lane now, send you back to yourself and Mr. Zach Sweeney.
Yeah, Zach coming back here, and we will see, looking through and watching this slipstream battle happen, it's very interesting through as we have Dan Kirby, Cameron Barker here. We're starting to also see traffic hit a little bit here, Zach, and that's, I think, going to be another big topic that, we haven't touched on.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you're always going to get that in any discipline of racing where you've got multi-classes and things, and it is going to be a difficult dynamic to sort of deal with. You've got to very much have that precise decision making and be able to then work your way through traffic effectively and make sure not only getting through effectively and cleanly, you're maintaining that track position relative to those in your class as well. Wouter De Bruyne, Bradley Sellers, they've been keeping each other company for quite some time. De Bruyne, I must say, is a driver that I've seen a number of times, as you can see, just on the left, and running their way through on the lower classes very, very nicely indeed. In fact, actually, that's the fight for the lead in the Div 1-2. That's Kirby versus Barker. They're going side by side as De Bruyne absolutely rocket ships his way past. But he's a very strong racer. Seen him in the Virtual Endurance Championship here on R-Factor 2. He knows how to drive a car well for a long period of time and is doing a very, very good job of that indeed, and running very nicely as well. He is, though, of course, a way off that fight for the lead and might, I don't know, I fear maybe going to have to run for second. It all depends on what Lane is going to do when pit stops come into effect.
Well, I've got to wonder, is there any sort of conserving going on, or is this a pure setup difference? That is really what I'm trying to sort of work out in my head a little bit on how the leader, Tom Lane, with no help, has pulled out 6.3 seconds just kind of out of nowhere, and then they have 7 seconds up to JT Tammy and Ross Smith here, who are continuing to run. I got to wonder, is that setup difference, pace difference? I don't think it's skill difference. Not saying that anyone is a bad driver or a better driver than others. They're all evenly matched, so I don't know.
Own it, Bradley. If you're going to diss someone, do it with pride. Do it with chest.
No.
You're here to make friends. That's fine. I'm not. I'm not aggressive, James Parker. I am just merely honest. And if I see questionable driving, I'll it's fine. It's fine. I say my mind. I'm here. I'm a commentator. I'm here to add value. I'm here to give my opinion on things, no matter how much people don't really care about it. I won't get sacked either. James Parker always threatens me with a sack, and I've been here for 2 years, so what does that say? Daniel Kirby, by the way, is still fighting away with Barker. That is a very late dive from the 47. Of course, lap traffic still playing a factor. And that's moments like that are when it gets dicey. When you're approaching a braking zone and you've got a differential in pace, it just gets scary.
Yeah, I think, sometimes it's exciting for us, but as the driver, it is really the scariest part. Honestly, having all that traffic in the mix, having drivers very close together, you've got to just trust the cars around you to, hope they have their head screwed on straight and that they understand what they're doing. Because sometimes you get in these positions, and I know anyone who's a fan of iRacing who started out in the MX5 series, you get in these close racing positions and, one driver around you just doesn't have it together like the rest, and you kind of have problems. But that's the fun of the VWSC, is every driver here has their head together. They know what they're looking at here. We have JT Tammy and Ross Smith side by side going through, and again, that's what happens when you have cars around you that you can trust and drivers you can trust. Of course, all of these guys have raced together, both modern, historic, NARS. They've all ran together very competitively, and they go through, so that is where things are interesting. We're starting to see Div 1-2 pit stops come through. I know a few drivers have already pit through. Lalonde down in Div 1-2 is in the pits there, now down into P7 in Div 1-2, and will continue to drop back as it stands. All of our Div 1-2 cars are at least a lap down here, so Div 3 has cycled their way through and is still cycling their way through. We'll see how this race goes with 45 minutes left to go.
Yeah, so we're not even half an hour into the race, which means that definitely is going to be a two-stop. Oh my goodness me, he was able to hang on to that quite nicely with JT Tammy. That was a nice little power slide, albeit not helpful for his run relative to Smith. A little bit further up in the Div 3s, we've got this battle still between Bradley Sellers and Valter De Bruyne fighting for P2 with, again, 45 minutes left on the clock. Still waiting for these guys to come in and take their stop, so maybe going to be able to stretch it just that little bit longer, maybe get to half distance and do a one-stop. Might well be very nip and tuck as to who does what, but there we can see, is there going to be a move from the Dutchman? Not quite close enough to find a way through on this particular occasion. And as we say, still a lot of race left to run. You don't really want to take too big of a risk too soon, as well as that very important pit stop strategy. I think that's going to be the most valuable part of this race.
Yeah, I do think pit stop strategy will be the make or break moment of this race as we go through. I think that's really all of these drivers are driving to some sort of pit stop strategy in their head that they're hoping will give them the most advantage. What that is, well, I'm not the driver, so I can't answer for you. I don't really know, but we do see more people into the pits here, and it is Tom Lane, our race leader, is going to be in the pits here. The first Div 3 to dive in, and of course in Div 1-2, we've had Jill Lalonde, we've had Scar Pope, we've had Reese Gardner. They have all pit in, so now it is Bradley Sellers and Wouter De Bruyne that will take over the lead. Of course, remember, they're all in the Shelby Daytonas, including Ross Smith. Your top 4 in Div 3 are in Shelby Daytonas, which is the smallest fuel tank. So is this telling us a two-stop guaranteed for the Shelbys?
Yes, if they can't do half an hour on a tank, there's no way they're going to be able to do 44 minutes on a tank either. So that means they'll be coming in probably for about a splash with maybe 15 minutes to go-ish. Depends, maybe they can save a bit more fuel in the second stint. Again, depends on circumstance. But I think definitely telling for Tom Lane how early he's come into the pit lane relative to Sellers and De Bruyne, who have made contact with the hairpin and well held from Bradley Sellers. That could have been a lot worse. Valter De Bruyne still finds his way through. Sellers is not going to be a happy bunny about that one, though. I can tell you that for free.
Yeah, that was a big moment there, and Bradley Sellers doing well to get things back going and underway. And you see the gap already closing back in very, very quickly between them. So that is very vindicative. Of course, Smith 7.9 seconds back here as we go. Wouter De Bruyne, Bradley Sellers closing this gap down. You can see how powerful that slipstream is between these two cars as they run through both Shelby Daytonas appropriately here, and they run through. Now they're going to go side by side down the straightaway here. We're coming up on another deep braking zone. How does this end? Well, it looks like it is going to be Bradley Sellers ahead there, and will slide up, take the lead, and now down into the braking zone. Any sort of move from Wouter De Bruyne? It doesn't look like it. It looks like very, very soft on the brakes there. As we come down into the next run, 42 minutes to go here. Sellers, De Bruyne. I do think it's interesting. We need to keep our eyes back on our wonderful friend Tom Lane. He's now down into 12th overall. He's not on your leaderboard here. He's 12th overall. He is back. 52 seconds currently will be the gap, and we'll see, does anyone else fancy the pits? Well, there's Bradley Sellers, there's Wouter De Bruyne, and both of them now into the pits here, and we'll see how that compares for them staying out an extra lap compared to Tom Lane.
Yeah, and I think this knock-on effect is going to be vital for them because I think maybe a little bit questionable there from Bradley Sellers. I think momentarily missing his pit box, which again is an easy thing to do, rocking back and forth. Maybe he's just still in gear, not entirely sure. Kirsten and Tammy continue on, by the way. So again, what could the knock-on effect be for them? Staying out an extra lap. But what it does do is limit the amount of time they have to stay stationary for that final stop. Right, they go a lap later for this one, which means they go a lap later for the next one, which means they only have, say, 10 minutes of fuel to put in as opposed to 15, which is going to save them a couple of seconds relative to Tom Lane. That, again, is if they can also do the same fuel saving for this stint, which, you know, they might not be able to, but that's going to be the aim, is to limit that final stop time relative to Tom Lane. Everyone's going to have to do 2 stops. The question is, how long is that second stop going to be, and how much time can you gain by doing it?
It's hard to say, and I think it's something that even if I tried to give you a solid answer to, it's not going to be able to give you an answer until really the answer is given to us. Dan Herlock here putting pressure on Busenik going through, and I do notice that pretty much everyone in Div 1-2, with the exception of these two in the lead, is in the pits there. Ulian, Gardner, Barker, Kirby, all in the pits there in the Div 1-2, so plenty of action in that pit lane, getting things going, and of course it is a tiny pit lane that is there and going. We'll see what happens for them, but you see Dan Herlock trying to find a pass. That's the number 66 ahead, and it looks like maybe catching off guard there is Dan Herlock again. Once that inside line, can't make the pass on Busenik, and now slots back in second place under the slipstream there. And that number 66, for those of you who are gonna be asking, that is gonna be the wonderful driver of Jerry Chin in the Div 3 AM class, and they are just sticking right to the back of Jerry Chin. He's not getting as much of a runaway there, even though he does have significantly more horsepower in that Ferrari that he is in ahead.
Yeah, exactly. He's going to be running a little bit better on the straights, but that just, I suppose, shows how powerful Slipstream can be at times. 40 minutes left to go, by the way. We're ticking closer and closer towards half distance, which will be in 3 minutes' time when we get, or 4 minutes' time, I should say, when we get to 36 minutes, 72-minute race, and the 36 will then be half distance. Looking very close to the fight for P1, of course, in the Div 1-2 class. Besink versus Herlock as the 47 goes a little bit wide there. A little bit sketchy, it must be said, from the Porsche in front. That just allows Dan Herlock through nice and easy to retain that lead. And what has been a fairly hard-fought battle between the pair of them, it must be said. But pit stop strategy, as we've said, is going to be all important by the time they get to the end of the race. Like we've said, it's difficult to make up time on track unless the driver in front or behind makes a mistake. That is really where you're going to be hoping to gain time relative, because it doesn't take much of a mistake to see a big time loss.
Tell you what, that Alpha has looked very, very stable in braking and cornering compared to the Porsche 904. I've really liked the look of that Alfa Romeo in the corners specifically. It's really kind of held up. The Porsche is very well rounded, but that Alpha has just been, there's something about how it's coming through those corners that is really catching my eye and getting things ahead here, as we see Busink there trying to just keep Dan Herlock behind a little bit as they go through. This is again the battle, Div 1-2 overall. They still need to pit, remember, 45 seconds the gap behind to Kirby, because these two still need to come into the pit lane here. They have stayed out. They are keeping things nice and pretty and going, and they are just continuing through. And again, this is our closest battle on track as it sits. This is just kind of the nature of these historic tracks, long straights, hard braking zones. You got to be careful there. Around the outside goes Dan Herlock, and I watched Dan Herlock practice that move through practice, that hard slide. I watched him do that several times through practice, and he's not able to make that stick as we continue on here. And now he's just back on the back of Busink. Can he get the pass becomes the million-dollar question. We've had our first DNF of Scar Pope, so out of 26 cars, only one is DNF'd as we hit half race distance.
It's not bad going, to be fair. I mean, definitely seen a worse track record from you know, the top end of esports. So these guys doing a really good job as to maintain that longevity, which is fantastic. Also having a look at this battle for the lead, and just getting told in our rear that the problem for the driver that DNF was unfortunately they just went in and out of the pits and then pulled over in DNF. So not entirely sure as to what the issue could well be for them, but nonetheless that stayed done for them. Herlock, is he going to go for the move to the inside of this hairpin? We'll of course see as they slam on to the anchors. And no is the answer to that particular question, but constantly gathering data as the 47 runs a little bit wide. That's the thing. I mean, we've already touched on it when it comes to this circuit, but it's not like, say, a Belle Isle or say an Alton Park or a Donington or a tighter circuit, right, where you've got corner after corner after corner, constantly stimulating you, constantly forcing that concentration. You've got corner, 30 seconds of nothing, and then a corner. So you're very rusty by the time you actually reach the next corner, which makes mistakes just that little bit easier as both of them come into the pit lane.
Yeah, and you can see that they are going to be flying down into this pit lane. They're getting things going. They're trying to go to the stop as quick as possible, because this is where you can really gain time. And look at Dan Herlock there, really feisty to get in, and sharing the pits there is the number 47 of Busink going in. And again, this is a narrow pit lane. They have to share pits here in this track as we go. And now we have Dan Kirby and Cameron Barker. They're going to be knowing in the background that those leaders are in the pits. This is really going to be where their moment goes. Can they catch up is the million-dollar question. Can they gain anything out of this? We'll see what the gaps are once pit stops are completed here as we go through and come down. You see the pit lane off to the right here, and these two are going to come flying along as it goes. They hold that right-hand side, and we'll see if they gain time. That is going to be the big question here on the run, and it is still JT Tammy your lead in Div 3 with a 5-second gap. Jerry Chin has taken the lead over Georgie Angelides, and right now it is Kirby and Barker with the million-dollar question of who's leading Div 1-2. At the moment, it is Kirby over Barker.
Yeah, it is, and to be fair, they've been constantly swapping places for quite some time, it must be said, and just jostling for position more than anything. But that team dynamic that they've got is running really well. That camaraderie, that mutual benefit, they know full well they'd rather a 1v1 for that final part of the race, right? They'd rather just have each other to worry about. They don't want to have to worry about Herlock or Busink or Gardner or Lalonde or anyone else. All they care about is themselves, because it's so much easier to win a 1v1 than when you have 3 or 4 other cars in the mix. You can have that battle together. You cannot really have to worry about too much of drivers in behind going for sends. You have that trust of drivers around you as well. So that 1v1 makes it just that bit more easy, and of course the gap they've got means they can afford to battle a little bit better as well. So right now they're biting the bullet and saying, you know what, I'd rather lead and whatever, but right now they're nose to tail, they're 10 seconds clear of everyone else, they've got 34 minutes left to go, and they can save this battle for later on.
Yeah, and I think that might be, the big key for them is if they're thinking of it, because these are teammates as well. Do they just want to build the gap out? Do they just want to kind of guarantee the team 1-2 and go from there? Which, if I'm them, that might be what I'd be considering is, hey, let's secure the team 1-2, let's run it out, and then we'll battle a bit towards the end here. Because 34 minutes, while it doesn't sound like a lot of time, is plenty of time. This is a very, very long race to go. And you have to remember that every time you look at this. That's the sort of tricky thing with endurance racing is you want to run as hard as you can. You want to race as fast as you can, but you do also have to keep your time management in mind and your race management in mind. You can afford to breathe a little bit every once in a while and go to the overall end game. And of course, if you watched any of the modern IMSA or WEC races here this year, you'll know that there's plenty of teams that have kind of lived that up and have really played the long game, and it's benefited for them. So we'll see how that plays out as these two run through. Again, just holding the slipstream, letting the Div 3 cars run by them that have the greater speed, and then they are just really settling in and running through the gap. By the way, the lap pace difference, 2:16s for JT Tammy, and our leader in Div 1-2, Dan Kirby, ran a 2:30, so we are running about a 14 to 15 second lap difference here as it goes, which is, it's a lot of time. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, they're doing a fantastic job. When it comes to the pace, it is running very quickly. And they're not only sort of doing it on a one-off lap, they're doing it fairly consistently. Tom Lane, I should say, is lapping really well. He's doing a brilliant job and should, in theory, be going on to win this race. However, I believe JT Tammy is very much going on for that one-stop strategy. I think it's going to be doable. It's going to be close, I think, in the end of things. But if JT Tammy can make that one-stop work, then that is going to be absolutely fantastic for Div 3, because everyone else is effectively forced onto that two-stop thanks to the Shelby's fuel tank, whereas the Stingray seems to be doing a little bit better on its fuel at the moment. 32 minutes left to go, and we're still yet to see JT Tammy come in. So let's see what's going to be happening with them. Also, a bit further down in the Div 3s, we've got the fight for 7th. We've got Dahlgren and Whited, which, of course, we haven't seen these two for a while, but they've been chucking down the laps quite nicely.
Yeah, I think they're just running consistent pace here. We'll see what comes out of this battle here as Jason Whited is closing that gap a bit to Magnus Dahlgren as we run through the Shelby versus the Ferrari. Again, I've seen that somewhere before. I can't put my tongue on it. We're in France. There's a Shelby and a Ferrari battling. Something somewhere. I've seen that. The only car that has not pit is JT Tammy, as we've talked about. It's very, very interesting, and he officially is at the point he can force this to a one-stop for him, and everybody else is at a two-stop. And honestly, he might win this on strategy alone. I think that would be a huge win for him too. So we'll see how that goes. 36 seconds the gap. The big key is going to be where that gap closes, because those Shelbys are scary quick as we've watched through all the way around here. Magnus Dahlgren still trying to keep Jason Whited behind the gap. Now 1.4 seconds as they come through the only left-hander on this track as they run down towards the deep right-hander of Virage, turn 3 as it goes, and negotiates that just fine. The sun is starting to come up here with 30 minutes to go, and I think that will just make things a bit easier on all the drivers to spot their braking zones, which you would think by now they have very, very down pat.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But they're sim racers, and sometimes maybe their abilities can sometimes be called into question. But again, we've been touching on it all race long as to how difficult the circuit can be. Also, you talk about virages. That literally translates from French into English as turn, which makes it so much easier because they are effectively just called turns, which is fantastic. But they sound so much more fancy in French, don't they, when it comes to corner names? But yeah, no, the hairpins are very, very difficult in of themselves. The fast rights that we've got at the start, and then of course that quick left that leads you into the first of the two hairpins, again, can be quite difficult to sort of bring that car back over and hit a decent racing line. We're seeing the sun start to rise though, and I'm sure that's going to be to the delight of some of these drivers as the braking markers, the potholes become all a little bit more clear as the sun begins to rise over the horizon.
Yeah, and the cars are really spread out there. When you look across, there's a big big field spread as we go through, and you can see that Mayer, sorry, I defaulted back to some weird pronunciations there. John Mayer in P13 is 90 seconds back, and look at kind of how the positions have changed through. Lane and Sellers are up a place respectively here. Kirby's up 4, Barker's up 1. Gray has passed Monet for the Div 1-2 AMs here, and we see Dan Herlock and Aliko Busink are still just bumper to bumper here and running through. I think this is where we're going to start seeing drivers get a little more competitive as the daylight comes up.
Yeah, because everything just becomes that a little bit more easy, doesn't it? It's an old circuit, so the track lighting is limited, so you're relying on the headlights of yourselves and others, and trust me, they are very limited in of themselves. There's a lot that you can't see, and when you're traveling at 150 mile an hour and want to slam your anchors on, it does become a little bit more difficult. So as the sun begins to rise and those lights come off, it'll become just easier, smoother for them to see their braking markers, the turning in points, and again, hopefully just limit those mistakes, which is going to be vital for this second half of the race, because it doesn't matter at all what lap you lead as long as it's the last one. Tom Lane has been looking good for a while, but JT Tammy is there. He's only just come in for his first stop and what we presume will be his final stop of the race as well. One small mistake can be costly, and if you don't need that final lap, if you don't come out of the final corner in front and see the checkered flag first, nothing else for the entire race matters. Lane and his speed will be irrelevant if he makes a mistake and bottles the win. That is as simple as that. 27.5 minutes left to go, and a fight all the way down, even for P18 and 19 overall, in between Reese Gardner and Gilles Lalonde.
Yeah, watching this battle, P18-19, Reese Gardner, Gilles Lalonde go through and continue. And I'm looking at top speeds, and I'm going to say these in kilometers an hour because that's how they are on my timing table. Ross Smith.
You don't know what kilometer is.
I was going to say, I really couldn't tell you what a kilometer is, but apparently you can measure them per hour, and that's telling for speed. But Ross Smith is our fastest car on track in the Shelby Daytona at 308 kilometers an hour. Every Shelby is running over 300 kilometers an hour, with the exception of Tom Lane. His top speed is 299 is what he's been running consistently. Jason Whited, 312 kilometers an hour going through, but the Corvette Stingray of JT Tammy is running 306. He's running competitive pace through, and if we think JT Tammy has only ran one stop, well, I would easily write this race off for JT Tammy as a win, because if every car in front of him has to stop again and he is running competitive pace, maybe a little bit faster than some of the ones he's got to compete with, he's possibly in a very, very good spot as we watch the battles continue to develop. Of course, Jerry Chen with a 7-second gap on George Angelides there. They've both made pit stops. They're running competitive paces. We'll see how that Div 3 AM battle shapes up as that race goes on. And of course, King Kirby, Cameron Barker still battling it out with Busink and Herlock in the mix as well. I think these two are trying to maybe catch up a little bit to Dan Kirby and Cameron Barker. We'll see how that goes, because that gap is 18 seconds they need to make up.
Yeah, it's a fairly sizable one, and obviously on the, well, yeah, that is a huge gap, and going to be one that is going to be difficult for them to go and catch. But if Kirby and Barker continue to do battle, maybe there's an opportunity for it to close. I will say that Kirby and Barker, they haven't been fighting all race long, have they? They've been doing exactly what they need to, which is just nip and tuck, saving fuel, working together. As I said earlier on, a 1v1 is so much easier to go and win, and that's what they're vying for. On the topic of JT Tammy, by the way, because he's doing a fantastic job, took that win, of course, a few weeks ago at Sebring, has had a number of podiums so far this season as well, and that is probably, I'm going to assume, I've not been here for the whole season, is in part due to his fantastic strategical prowess. That's 75, taking a huge good old slide going through that very fast right-hander. I have to say that was mightily impressive as to hang on to that car, and probably scaring Kirby and Barker just a little bit, because if that spins in front of them, there's probably not much they can do in order to avoid it.
Yeah, and sometimes that's, again, you've got to know the cars around you. You've got to just be careful a little bit, risk it for the $1 million biscuit. And that is kind of what they're doing here as they run through and they stick behind that number 75 as we go. Checking in with our Div 1-2 AM here, Gray and Monet. And again, these are our only two Div 1-2 AMs that are battling here. And they are keeping the race interesting in the battle for Div 1-2. And we haven't talked about it a lot today, but look at this as they break side by side. And these are the only two battling with each other. Nobody else around them to worry about. They just need to keep in pace of each other. And we'll see how this battle develops here. The Porsche is going to be running side by side, and they're not teammates, even though they're running similar colors, and they run side by side all the way down the main straight here. And what can they do? Who comes out ahead of this battle? Well, they've still got 23 minutes to go here, but they're racing like it's the final lap.
Yeah, exactly, and it's not the final lap. I know that's obvious. But you can't, right? Like we've said earlier, I mean, to be fair, it's only those two in class, so they're probably not going to be worried too much when it comes to fighting amongst each other. So that is a direct fight for the lead. But right now, the risk is there. I mean, it could be so easy that Adam Gray makes a mistake and spins, and equally for Eric Monet as well, is exactly right there. 440 into the very solid hay bales, I have to say. That is remarkable how condensed they are. But that's what happens. And because they fought with 23 minutes left to go, he's made a mistake, and now the win is vastly out of reach, offline and off the road. Boom. That is, wow. Solid.
Ouch.
No, well, it probably is a very, no, it's a field. It just looks like hay, and I do correct myself, that's not a hay bale, otherwise that would be a world record setting one, I'm sure. But nonetheless, that's a very dense field of whatever crop that is, and it's a very it's one that brought that car to a very quick halt, and unfortunately brought an end to that Div 1-2 AM battle for the lead, which is a shame. But Gray's not going to complain.
Yeah, Gray will be very, very thrilled with that, because at this point, Gray is going to have a massive gap there of about 14 seconds that can just sort of breathe through and let it go. The gap now 16 seconds, continuing to open up. Busink and Herlock still battling. In the Div 3 AMs, Mayer has DNF, so I'm curious what's happened to John Mayer there in the 250 GTO that has caused that number 88 to DNF out. So only 2 DNFs here in this race overall, which has been very impressive to see. This is John Mayer, and we'll see how with a hard hook to the right, and the tree said get off. That's it's very interesting there, and James in the ear is saying we might have a disconnect. It's hard to tell. That's a very, that looks like just lost the wheel. That's an unfortunate way to end your day there with 20 minutes to go, running in a very competitive, comfortable position. But that is, we don't get mechanical failures here in the VWSC, but you can have mechanical failures if your wheel decides it doesn't want to work anymore.
Yeah, I've had it all too often with wheels deciding they don't want to work, and it's so frustrating when you sort of hear the Windows noise of it disconnecting or whatever, and you're just like, yeah, you know exactly what's going to happen. Suppose it is the equivalent of an engine blowing up in real life or whatever in sort of the world of sim racing. That's exactly what you get, is a wheel disconnect or an internet dropout, those sort of things that are outside of your control but do unfortunately have a big hold over your race, and they can happen to anyone. Doesn't matter if you're fast or slow or a championship leader or doing really well in this race. It will happen to anyone at any time, and it does not care who. Back to the live action though, we've got Busink versus Dan Herlock. They've been fighting for third for quite some time, but unfortunately not quite to the same pace of the top two in the Div 1-2 class. The Porsche, of course, versus the Alfa Romeo. I have to say to Busink, he's doing a good job in that Porsche in what is a very Alfa Romeo dominated class.
Yeah, he's doing a very good job of keeping the Porsche represented here. We're starting to have more cars into the pits yet again here as we jump through. Busink there with Herlock. Herlock and that Alfa Romeo just keeping company. And I have to say, I really, really like the look of the Alfa a little bit more than the Porsche, but that is just a looks preference. I think the Porsche does drive a little bit better than the Alfa, but in terms of the speed today, it really is just Alfa domination all the way around, but Busink doing very well to represent here. 20 minutes officially remaining on the clock here, Zach. And I got to ask you, as we watched Dan Herlock slide that car again, I watched him practice that through practice all day today, and he does well to keep that car moving. I got to ask you, who's the standout today, and what are your final predictions, if any?
I don't know. I've got to be honest. when it comes to the with 19.5 minutes left to go, have to say these two drivers have been really impressive. Dan Kirby and Cameron Barker. The way they've been able to work together, this is everything you want from two sim racers, right? They knew what job they had at hand. They knew the pace they both had, and they didn't let ego get in the way. They didn't fight too soon for a lead. They knew what they needed to do, which was settle down, find a rhythm, be consistent, save fuel, and get away from everyone else so they can isolate themselves at the front. And I know Div 3 is looking very, very hotly contested with JT Tammy and saving fuel and things, but I have to say that these two, I mean, everything is fantastic. I mean, they haven't put a foot wrong. They've made no mistakes. And when we talk about racecraft, this is the perfect embodiment of that. They've had no ego, no pride. They've just got on with the job, and it's working.
That is sometimes just the key, is to just get on with the job. Just let it go. And as you said, it is working. It's working very well for them as we go through and continue on. 18 minutes left to go, and I'm trying to figure out when these guys are going to make their second stops. As I look here, not yet. 18 minutes left to go. Not the time for the pit stops for Dan Kirby and Cameron Barker as we continue on here with this race. And I don't see anyone else really trying to dive into the pits yet. I don't see Cameron Barker putting pressure on his teammate. It looks like at the moment, things are nice and relaxed, with the exception. Look at the Div 3 leaderboard here. Look at JT Tammy in that Corvette catching up to that Shelby there of Ross Smith. That's your battle for P4 that is going to start heating up. It seems like he is settled in and may just be following some slipstream there. And I do see it looks like Herlock and Busink still holding on neck and neck as well there in the background.
Yeah, I mean, they are. I mean, that fight for P3 is going to be going on for quite some time, and I think those are the two standout battles in Div 1-2, Kirby and Barker, Busink versus Herlock. That's been the tale of the tale for the last nearly an hour, actually. We're very much encroaching on to the end of this race, and I have to say, it definitely has flown by with how fantastic the driving has been from a lot of pieces, from a lot of drivers. The strategy has definitely kept it alive, and while I will admit, granted, it has been a slow burner, we're constantly waiting for the narrative to conclude. I mean, everything has got a start, a middle, and an end. We got the start out of the way. We're in that middle phase right now, the build up towards that climax, and hopefully it is going to be a fairly substantial climax, not a disappointing one. With hopefully it's going to be good, because JT Tammy on that one stop, everyone else on that two stop. Hopefully that Div 3 is going to be close, and of course Div 1-2 still waiting for Kirby and Barker to even look at a move on each other.
Yeah, I'm waiting. It really is just a waiting game, which sometimes isn't the worst thing, but you know something's going to come up. The question is just when, as I'm starting to see more cars into the pits here. And it looks like Tom Lane has been our next car into the pits as we sit. We'll continue to see what happens here for these drivers. Again, just Herlock and Busink here continuing to keep action. And at what point does Dan Herlock decide to finally make a move here? 16 minutes left to go, and you got to do something eventually here. I know you can sit back in the back, but if your big goal is to move forward, you've kind of thrown off your chance of getting above P3 with these two. And you see Dan Herlock again trying to look for some sort of a switchback here, a little bit deeper on the brakes. That Alpha a little bit better on the corner exit there, and the Porsche will continue on in the lead with the advantage. I'm still trying to look. JT Tammy's up into fourth place here, just less than a second off of Ross Smith there in the Div 3. And again, if we're expecting JT Tammy to not stop again, well, it looks like JT Tammy will need to keep that 10 seconds on Tom Lane. Tom Lane now out of the pits here, if he can keep those 10 seconds forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be ideal, isn't it, to have as much time in your pocket as possible, but it is going to be tricky. 15 minutes left to go, of course, and we are expecting Lane to, of course, be able to close in more and more, because he's got more confidence to push. He's got a tank that can comfortably get him to the end. JT Tammy, of course, is going to have to do a little bit of fuel saving. 15 minutes left on the clock. The fight for, at the moment, Div 1-2 lead, of course, as Barker and Kirby have come in. Of course, still waiting for these two to come in. I don't think there's going to be too much in terms of drama when it comes to the difference in strategies. This is the battle a little bit further up, Div 3 with Bradley Sellers and Ross Smith. I have to say, very impressed as the comeback that Smith has had after a very early mistake.
Yeah, Ross Smith has played the long game here. JT Tammy's in the mix of this as well, so watch out here because our possible race winner in the Div 3, if he can hold on to it, is right on the back, because of course we're expecting Ross Smith to have to stop here. JT Tammy going through. Sellers is up in the mix as well, so we'll see how things develop here. Ross Smith has gotten the pass, or JT Tammy has gotten the pass done, and now needs to look to get the pass done on Ross Smith if possible. And of course, watch the Div 3 AM, because Georgie Angelides has started to roll in Jerry Chen and has started to close that gap. So all of a sudden, we go from not a lot going on to a lot of action going on here at once. 13 minutes left to go as we keep this race underway. It's a 3-car battle here for P2 of the Div 3s, possibly the win here if they can keep things going, but I don't think Smith can keep it on the track. I don't think Sellers can keep it on the track. So really, JT Tammy is just in the fight of his life here and needs to kind of find that smooth strategy of the race, of keeping enough fuel in the tank, also not battling too hard. Needs to make sure there is a gap kept to lane if possible.
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, we've got to be careful not to get caught up battling each other, because again, that's all they're going to do is lose time and time. And if I was Tammy, it's just going to be a case of sitting behind, because all you're going to be doing is carrying risk. We've still got to wait for Smith to come into the pit lane. So why fight with him? Sit in a slipstream, don't take any risks, and maintain that gap. The moment you engage in battling, like we saw in Div 1-2 AM, as Monet tried to go around the outside and battle with Gray, it turned down and immediately, unfortunately, saw them out of contention. Tammy does not want to do that. He does not want to throw away a potential victory for the short-term gain of track position.
Yeah, that is what I see. The thing is, it's very easy for us in the booth to say that, but you have to remember too that race car drivers have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, and they always want to be the car ahead if possible. So JT Tammy very strong with the strategy, but I would not be surprised if JT Tammy wants to get this pass done and just get Ross Smith out of the way and try to keep that car moving forward. Now JT Tammy trying to get that pass done. Ross Smith to the outside. JT Tammy will have the inside as we hit the braking zone, and we are just 200 meters, 100 meters hard on the brakes, but Ross Smith a little bit deeper on the brakes. JT Tammy will have to stay behind. Ross Smith slides a bit there. Can JT Tammy take advantage? They'll be side by side on the exit, and oh, a little bit of contact. There's that risk reward we talked about, but I think JT Tammy will get ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to be honest, I'm so confused as to what Tammy is doing, because he's only got 9.5 seconds back to lane, and in fairness, there's still, there's about 11 minutes left to go. 9.8 seconds to close, and that period of time is going to be difficult, as into the pit lane does come Bradley Sellers and Ross Smith. So Tammy does take the race lead, and that's going to be great news to him, because he can now have clear air and focus. Same too, of course, for Tom Lane. He's not got anyone to focus about either. 11 seconds to close in just as many minutes. It's going to be tough. All depends as to how much fuel Tammy's got left in the tank and how much he's comfortable to push with, because if he's barely going to make it and has to save all the way to the checkered flag, that's a completely different story than if he's got a little bit in reserve he can push with.
Well, and here's the thing too, I'll point out as we watch the gap, already 0.6 of a second off of that gap early on. So the thing I will remind you of, Zach, and I know you know this, but this is kind of my trademark phrase. It's one thing to catch, it's another to pass. So as the gap comes down to now 10 seconds flat, as JT Tammy is driving the wheels off of that C2 Stingray and is going to do everything in his power to try to keep that gap up. Gap now 9.6 seconds. I saw it at one point. It's one thing to catch, it's another to pass. So even with just 10 minutes left to go, if Tom Lane catches JT Tammy, he's then got to proceed to pass JT Tammy. And then you could end up in this fun little back and forth DRS slipstream battle in these 1964 cars that don't have DRS, but can dream of having DRS. And that is, I mean, that could be a big battle all the way to the end. 10 minutes to go as of now.
Yeah, drag reduction in cars like these is probably going to go as far as closing the windows. That's about all you could do to actively reduce the drag, and depends how toasty it is in the cockpit of those virtual machines, which, to be fair, in the UK, it's been perfectly fine today. It's been pouring of rain, so for our UK drivers, they're going to be feeling absolutely none of the force of any heat waves. Maybe some of the European drivers might be a little bit toasty in their sim rigs, because it can get hot. Of course, that's got absolutely no effect on the cars themselves, but only if maybe you could open some windows. Maybe there would be some plays to be made. I don't know, whatever. I'm clutching at short straws here. 9 minutes left to go in this race. Ross Smith, Bradley Sellers, 5 and 6. Of course, they've emerged from the pit lane and fighting away for respective positions. So it's going to be Ross Smith ahead of Sellers, and of course that yellow machine that Sellers is running in, very vibrant, it must be said, in 6th place, but no way through for now. We are very quickly ticking down the minutes as Ross Smith makes a huge mistake way too late on the brakes. Sellers says, cheers, mate. Through he goes and into 5th.
That's not the first time Ross Smith has done that either. Remember, very early on in the race, Ross Smith went deep on the brakes. So there's something with the braking there for Ross Smith in that Shelby Daytona. He just hasn't nailed it this race. And unfortunately, I think that is going to be what kind of cost him back. Is he is now in 6th place here going through. JT Tammy still has 10.5 seconds the gap here as we go down the main straight. So JT Tammy still just kind of holding on the gap, fluctuating, I will say, but with under 8.5 minutes to go, I think JT Tammy might be okay here. I think the big question for me is going to be in Div 3 AMs, because Jerry Chen and George Angelides are just, they've swapped positions back and forth a couple of times here as we go. And of course, in Div 1-2 Boosting Herlock, that is a big battle, as we have, of course, Barker and Kirby in the mix as well there, even though the gap is 30 seconds back between P1-2 and P3. So they are going to battle on there. But Chen and George will be the big battle in the Div 3 AM, as they are the only 2 Div 3 AM cars running. So, of course, they have to be the big battle.
Yeah, exactly. They want to be giving themselves a little bit of something to fight for, which hasn't been the story for that particular class, unfortunately, all race long. But hopefully now it's closer. With 7.5 minutes to go, we can have a bit of a battle between the 2 Ferraris. Chen, Angelides battling their way through. Very twitchy, it must be said. And oh my goodness me, it's already ending in tears. The 66, is he going to reach the cornfield? Not quite. So able to rejoin the circuit. But Chen and Angelides, what happened there? Because that particular part of the circuit, so I suppose very similar to maybe the Porsche curbs in the same sort of dynamic of corner that you have. And going side by side at the Porsche curves is deadly. Going side by side here is equally as deadly. And there it is, completely by Angelides.
Yeah, you just completely lost the back end. Unfortunately, it does look like that number 66 is the big loser in the battle of the 2 there of Jerry Chen. It does look like, though, that George has given that position back from what it looks like. So it does look like George slowed up, gave the position back to Jerry Chen, as he said, you know what, that was on me. And now they just run in battle. 6.5 minutes left to go here.
Time is ticking down, and with that come laps, and of course with that comes opportunities to succeed. JT Tammy leads Tom Lane in Division 3 by 9.4 seconds. The last lap by was only 9/10 of a second quicker by Tom Lane. There's not enough time left in this race to catch. As long as Tammy can keep it clean and has enough fuel, he is going to be absolutely fine. In fact, actually, his top end speed as well in that Stingray is comfortably 13 kilometers an hour quicker than Tom Lane. So as long as he's saving his fuel, surely it's an easy victory.
Oh, there's a big snap from Jerry Chen.
In a bit.
Woo. All right. That looks like a rear end lockup there. I said Jerry Chen, that was George Angelides there with a big rear end lockup. So I think George might have just cemented the race there for him, as he hard on the brakes, slides through straight into one wall and around to the other. Big moment there. I'm looking at JT Tammy. That gap is fluctuating anywhere from 11 seconds to 8 seconds between JT Tammy and Tom Lane. But it does look like, you know, as you said, I think JT Tammy has it in the tank, as long as he quite literally has it in the tank as we go through. It does look like Jerry Chen, George Angelides. That gap now 14 seconds. So I believe Jerry Chen has cemented this race for himself there with 5 minutes to go on the small error there that George just made towards the end. and we'll see how that goes. Looking through any other big battles, well, Busink and Herlock are still battling very, very hard. That is who is just behind you there in the battle for the Div 1-2 win, and they are very, very competitive. You see Dan Herlock again with that little bit of a slide there that he has going on in that Alfa Romeo, trying to get past the Porsche if he can, and they're trying to just hold that slipstream of Jerry Chen in the background. 4.5 minutes left to go.
Yeah, really getting on with this race now. It is the final stage, and so far it has been absolutely sensational in the standard of racing that we've been receiving, but there is still a lot more to uncover. So many more questions that need answering. The gap at the front in Division 3, less than 8.5 seconds. Another second taken out on that previous lap by Tom Lane on JT Tammy. So it is coming down. Question is it too little, too late? And is that one stop going to reign supreme in Division 1? The Div 3 AM, as we've just seen, has pretty much been settled between Chen and Angelidis. So unfortunately for Angelidis, he pretty much made his own bed in that regard and gave the victory going the way of Jerry Chen. That fight, though, at the moment, the Div 1-2 lead is still going the way of Busink and Dan Herlock. Both of them only doing one stop. If they don't need to stop, that is surely an easy victory for them, because Dan Kirby and Cameron Barker, as close as they are, they're still 25 seconds back. If Busink and Herlock, I've dealt with them all race long. I thought it was going to be an easy victory for the two Alfa Romeos, but if they're going to be able to get to the end of this race on one stop, it's an easy 1-2 for them, and it is an absolute underhand masterclass from the top two.
I don't know how they would make it on one stop if nobody else has. I would think that they need to come in and maybe just do a splash and dash. I don't know here, but we're 3 minutes to go, and if you're at a point now where fuel's a question, well, you might as well just throw your entire last hour and a half away, qualifying and the race, because that would be a massive blunder from these two as we go. But they continue on. 2 minutes, 40 seconds left to go here. And we'll see where things happen. We are having a little bit of technical things with the car sounds in the background, so appreciate everyone sticking around as we sort that out. Hashtag just R Factor 2 things, and we will leave it at that as we go. We'll see what happens here. This is the battle. Busink, Herlock just right in the mix, and Zach. Oh, big slide there from Busink.
Yeah, able to hang on to it, though. Fantastic stuff there from the Porsche. Of course, is going to get a little bit squirrely, and maybe Herlock is now starting to realize that this is his opportunity. He's been playing second fiddle all race long and wants that race victory. It's the penultimate lap of the race, of course, depending on when the Div 3 leader of JT Tammy crosses the line to start the final lap. But these guys realistically have got a lap and a half left to race, and Herlock, he's looking feisty. Busink definitely under pressure.
Yeah, Herlock, is that little slide through the turn, is it going to pay off for him here for Dan Herlock? We'll see what he does here as we run through. Busink just needs to hold on, but you saw Herlock take that slightly different line through the corner as we go on, and we head under the Dunlop Bridge here. It does look like Herlock just needs to stick to the back. 1:20 seconds left to go, so it should be the completion of this lap for them, plus one more, I believe. Only just one more. This might be the final lap, actually, for our Div 1-2 as we watch the timer tick down. 60 seconds left to go. It's gonna be very close. They just ticked through the middle sector here as we run. It's gonna be very, very close for them down the straightaway. Here we go. And man, it's hard for me to judge on the time. This might be it. This might be Dan Herlock's only option, Zach.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to want to do it. He'll get one more lap, of course, but you never want to waste an opportunity. Every opportunity you get, you need to take, and look at that. He's practically pushing Busink through. There is JT Tammy, by the way, just in behind, I believe, in that Corvette Stingray. So there is the lap, and this will be their final run by the Porsche versus the Alfa Romeo. They've done the absolute golden strategy in, of course, their class, the Div 1-2, and it's Porsche versus Alfa Romeo. One more time by, or will it be actually 5 seconds on the clock? Will Tammy start another lap? He will. So with 2 seconds to spare, they'll continue on. Busink versus Herlock. Let's bring it on for 5 more miles.
Man, 5 more miles to go, 8 kilometers to go, and they just barely have the run through here for Busink and Herlock. And this is going to be where Herlock just needs to leave it all on the line. You don't have any more gas in the tank. You have nothing more to go. They've pulled off the one pit stop dream, these two. So they've got to make something happen as that number 75 flies by them there. And this is going to be just the big moment that they need to have something together. JT Tammy is on a final run here, a final salute to the course as well. The gap is 5.8 seconds up in the front between JT Tammy and Tom Lane, and that will be where they settle in. They've got about 3/4 of a lap to go as they run through. And we watch here, Herlock just doesn't seem to have a response here for Busink to get past here. This is going to be one of his final chances. That 75 gets through, and both of them have to settle in. Zach, this might be the final opportunity.
Yeah, it might well be indeed. Busink versus Dan Herlock. Of course, it's pretty much definitively going to be JT Tammy that takes the victory in the Div 3s, but the opportunities are wearing thinner and thinner for this respective battle. It's almost certain it's going to be one of these two, but which one is it going to be? The last 72 minutes of racing has been boiling down effectively to this final braking zone.
Yeah, we run up the hill here. We'll come over the hill to down the hill. And this is going to be where Dan Herlock needs to find something. He's 700ths of a second back here. He needs to stick the nose out. He's got to risk it. He's got to find a move here as we run down long straightaway here. Head past the marshal's post, head up the hill, and you're heading towards the braking zone. What can you do? JT Tammy will be coming across the line here just ahead of them. And JT Tammy will have that win. The gap 5 seconds here. Masterclass to pull off a one pit stop strategy, and will bring it across the line. It will be the winner. JT Tammy in the Stingray Chevy Corvette brings it across the line, brings the win home in the VWSC Historic Series. A good win there, but what happens in the background with Dan Herlock and Busink? Who came out ahead for them? That is going to be the big question. It is Herlock ahead of Busink here as they come across the line, and it will be Dan Herlock who will bring the Alfa Romeo home ahead of Aliko Busink, and gets the pass done in the final corner. And after 72 minutes, this battle has boiled down, and it is Dan Herlock who will just bring it home. Your battle in the Div 3 AMs, it was Jerry Chen just ahead of George Angelides by about 13 seconds. And then, of course, in the Div 1-2 AMs, it is Adam Gray who will bring things home ahead of Eric Monet. And that is a way to end out 72 minutes. 72 minutes that at some points, well, our producer in the background, JP Broadcasting, said the word boring, but I think after 72 minutes, there was plenty of good action.
Throw him under the bus. I have never done that. I've never thrown James under the bus with anything in my life. And he has absolutely just completely destroyed James Parfit. I mean, in some essence, it's right. There is a slow burner process to every race, right? Every race at some point will be dull. Every race at some point will have elements of boring to them. But without the boring, you can't appreciate the good. In the same essence of sort of, if a race has every single corner side by side for the leads and 3 wide moments, you get numb to it. And you can't properly appreciate it for what it is. We had to have the boring for the good to come through. But what a race that was. The strategical masterclass. It wasn't constant chaos, but the clever drive there from JT Tammy to take the victory.
Well, and here's the thing is you don't want constant chaos here as we get the results on the screen. JT Tammy pulling off the one-stop masterclass there. Tom Lane in second, Nicholas Kirsten in third, Wouter de Bruin in fourth, Ross Smith in fifth, Bradley Sellers in P6, Magnus Dahlgren in P7, Brian Hall in P8, Timon Suvic in P9, Jason Whited in P10. And then from there, it was George Angelides, it was Dan Herlock, it was Aliko Busink, it was Dan Kirby, Cameron Barker, Reese Gardner, John Ulian, Gilles Lalonde, Eduardo Benica, and Neil Wood coming out with P22 as it stands. And then, of course, it was Neil Wood, Adam Gray, Eric Monet, John Mayer, and Scar Pope. Only 2 DNFs here, which was very impressive, actually, for the amount of cars that we had on track. Of course, one of those DNFs, John Mayer, some disconnect, and then Scar Pope just kind of disconnecting somewhere as well. So a very interesting run through and a good amount of action. While it was a slow burner, it was a very, very good race all the way through. And Zach, I gotta say, I enjoyed it, especially when things kind of came down nail biting towards the end.
It was, and again, like I say, I mean, we really do have to appreciate races like that because, again, we didn't need side by side for the lead constantly. We just needed that difference in strategy. We just needed JT Tammy to try something different in the Div 3 fight, of course, in the Div 1 2 AM as well. When it was Jerry Chen versus George Angelidis, that was also fantastic. A little bit further down as well between Herlock and that battle. Again, it was very, very close indeed. And the battles that we had were fantastic. And once again, proving why historic circuits are as good as they are, why historic cars are as good as they are, and why they should be celebrated. At a circuit that looks very simplistic and might get a little bit numb to drive with only 5 corners, it definitely delivered a decent race.
Yeah, again, deceptively challenging is the best way I have to describe this circuit. Deceptively challenging is really kind of where it is for me because we saw Ross Smith especially have those two big moments there in the braking zone that, ultimately, settled Ross into fifth place where he could have been possibly in the top three. And he was running very competitively all the way through, but he does settle into fifth place overall. So we'll see how that runs. We'll see here, give our drivers a couple minutes to kind of relax in after what's been probably a pretty rough race for them. Because even though, not a bunch of huge passing going on, it was a very, very, you had cars bumper to bumper the entire time. And that is, I think, what's really interesting to see is that even though not a lot, in terms of, big crashes, anything crazy, bumper to bumper, the car stayed most of the time.
Yeah, and I think that was the dynamic that we were really sort of expecting from this race. With the slipstream and how important it was going to be, looking at the circuit itself, and thankfully we didn't see too much in terms of spins as well. So everyone kept it really close. The pace between each of the cars again was also really close. The top speed between, say, the Alfa Romeo and the Porsche, or the Corvette and the Shelby, they were all relatively close, which lent itself very nicely to keep everyone nicely bunched up. But all in all, I think everyone drove really maturely. The consistency was there. The strategy was there. We saw a fantastic race, and hopefully it's going to come down to the wire when it comes to the championship. But it's a very, very long one. I mean, we're barely scratching the surface of the VWSC at the moment.
Yeah, when you look at the championship ahead, we are just now really hitting half distance on this VWSC championship on the historic series. We run all the way to December. I mean, look at this. We're just now hitting this. So we've got the hill climb. We've got Kappa Dienna coming up, Goodwood, Nürburgring, Monza, Bridgehampton, the Providence Alps hill climb, which I think the hill climb is going to be what's really interesting to see how that goes. And of course, we don't end until the 7th of December. We've got to run all the way to December 7th. That is going to be where the big, big moment comes in as we wait on everyone to come through. It's very interesting to see that it's such a long calendar. And remember, we started all the way back in February with everything. So we'll see where things are. Let's find our winner here. Overall, it was, of course, going to be Mr. Arrive and Drive, Mr. JT Tammy. Let's see if we can find him here and bring him into the broadcast booth, which it is not letting me actually. So as I try to bring our drivers
Not
in.
important enough, Bradley. You don't have the power.
So
I can see we've got Dan Herlock though waiting for us. So that was a very hard fought battle. So take it away.
yeah, and Dan Herlock, welcome in. Congratulations there on the Div 1-2 win after a very long, strenuous battle. Kind of tell me how your race went.
Yeah, it was a interesting race as during the break between qualifying and the race, I found out my pedals weren't quite working. So I basically had to sit in the slipstream or I would be nowhere for that race. So that was interesting, but managed it.
Kind of talk to me about this track in general there with, especially when you're running the Alfa Romeo. The Alfa seemed very stable in the corners, and considering there's only 5 corners across the circuit, and I don't count one of them as a corner, so really it's just 4 turns. Kind of how'd the Alfa feel overall?
So when I was pushing, Alpha does like to get quite sideways, but most of that race was saving fuel, especially the second half when we realized all of a sudden we'd made it half distance pretty much on the first stop by accident. So accidentals one-stop strategy came into effect then, and it worked surprisingly. But yeah, it was managing fuel, especially second half, but it worked out.
Yeah, and when you catch yourself in those moments, especially sitting in the slipstream, you just said your pedals weren't working, and then you magically find a one stop. I mean, the win has to be sweeter that way too.
Yeah, it's definitely a slight boost over a standard, boring lead every lap sort of race. I don't think I led a lap other than the last. I'm not sure, but yeah, it was good. Always able to work with Ilko. He's always a very good driver and one you can be comfortable racing very close with and slipstreaming.
Yeah, and of course, before we let you go, sir, anyone you want to thank, anyone you want to shout out, and then we will let you go enjoy your victory.
Just everyone in the voice chat making it fun, and everyone who develops and works on these mods, the broadcast team, all that stuff that keeps it entertaining. So, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And thank you, Dan. Congratulations on your win. We'll let you go enjoy, and we will catch you at the next race.
Thank you.
Awesome. And that was Dan Herlock. Let's go ahead and bring in our next driver here and bring in Mr. JT Tammy. JT, congratulations on a win overall, pulling off the one-stop masterclass. Tell me, how's it feel?
Feels good. I needed that.
Kind of, did you always think you were going to do the one-stop? Were you planning on a two-stop, or how did this race come to you?
No, it was always going to be a one stop. I just had to save a little bit in the first stint to hit that 18 lap mark, and then the second stint I had enough fuel that I could really push if I needed to.
Yeah, and kind of looking through, finding your balance. You were in that, you were in the run with Ross there at one point through. You were kind of after your pit stop trying to battle your way through. Was there ever a point where you were kind of worried about getting in traffic? We saw, of course, some moments, some slides. Kind of how did the car feel, and how was it driving through people versus trying to just get to the front and stay at the front?
Yeah, driving around other traffic is a bit more difficult just because the lift and coast method I do for my braking is quite a bit different, and it can really catch you out sometimes. But yeah, I'm a little bit worried about. I think Ross and Bradley were having to save just a little bit to make the extra lap, and I was kind of getting caught in that, and I wasn't sure what that was going to look like once Tom and everybody had done their second stop. So I was just trying to stay consistent and not lose too much time.
Yeah, and it seems like it worked really well for you because you did come out with the win overall here after 1.2 hours. Anyone you want to thank? Anyone you want to shout out, JT, before we let you go for the evening?
Just you guys. This broadcast is awesome. The CMS team that built these cars. They do the track. Don was working super hard to get this track ready for us, and we only got to do it because he came through at the end of the day, and it's a great product that we get to play with week in and week out. So just thanks to everybody that makes this happen.
Awesome, and thank you, JT. Congratulations on your win.
Thank you.
All right, and then let's go ahead and pull in Mr. Adam Gray here. Adam Gray, of course, winning the Div 1-2 AM. And Adam, it was a hard-fought battle for a while. How'd the race feel for you?
Hard work. Me and Eric had some good battles. We both received damage, but to be honest, I didn't even think I was going to make it to the end because I had to pop a fuel save.
Yeah, we watched that battle there going through at one point. How'd that feel for you in that battle? Because it seems like the car was really, really competitive.
Yeah, like I said, I think me and Eric were both equal. Maybe he was a bit faster, but we just had a good battle. Basically, it was so he hit me, I hit him by mistake. So we both received some damage, but it was a good battle. I enjoyed it.
And kind of looking through, of course, it was just you and him in class. Does that ever affect how you race at all, or does it make it more competitive for you, Adam?
Um, well, Eric's my who I'm trying to beat anyway, because I think I'm second on the table at the moment with him, being top. So he is who I'm racing. I was quite disappointed that there was no more AMs today, because normally there's quite a few. So, but yeah, race was on, trying to get that win.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Adam, before we let you go, anyone you want to thank, anyone you want to shout out before we let you go enjoy this win?
Just the Reptile Racing that missed it today, and a big shout out to Eric. Good racing. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Absolutely. It was a great race, and we'll let you go enjoy your win here, and we will let you go.
Cheers. Thank you.
Congrats. All right. And then last but not least, it is going to be our Div 3 AM winner, which should be Jerry Chin, wherever Jerry Chin has went. But I do see George Angelides waiting around. So let's see how George is feeling here. George, hello. My friend. How are you?
Well, I didn't get the win, right? So it's not the best. I'm stepping in for Jerry because Jerry cannot make it. He has to leave early. So I just thought, at least to talk about a little bit about what went in Division 3 AM.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a post before the race that a few of the Division 3 AM drivers were out for a number of reasons. So the big battle, of course, came between you and Jerry Chin, and then of course John Mayer, who ended up having a big accident, and we lost him later in the race. But kind of talk to me about your battle between you and Jerry.
Yeah, I mean, what ended up happening was that they thought that Jerry's going to go for the single stop strategy, which is usually his MO of fuel saving. So I knew I was not going to do that because it was too much save on fuel. And then I decided to go hardcore on pace. So I knew by the end of the race, I had to have a 25-second to 30-second delta on him. And it was working okay. And then I had Timon Suvic and Brian Hall coming, slipstreaming each other behind me. And then they caught me up. I didn't want to get caught into that mess. So I just let them go. But by the time I let them go, I lost 4 seconds of the time I made to Jerry. So then I was pushing to make that up, and I made a mistake going into pit lane, as you probably saw. Lost the brake, spun the car, and then lost about 10 seconds. So Jerry passed me in the pit, in the stop. But what was crazy was that Jerry did not do what I thought he would do, which was the fuel saving, and he was on the same strategy as I was. So then it was basically a straight race to the end between the two of us. It was 10 seconds ahead. I came behind him, and then I started just gapping like crazy to make up that position back, and which I did. And then I thought that was pretty much done and dusted and over. And but Jerry's decided that he wanted to come back on me, and he passed me. Then I tried to gap him again and clear him for good, and that did not happen because we had contact on turn 2. I readdressed, let him go, but then coming into turn 6, I believe, the hairpin before the start, finish straight. I think my brakes were done at that point. They were too hot and completely worn out. And then when I pressed the pedal, like the car immediately jerked, and then went off, and then that was basically it.
Yeah, it was a hard-fought battle. It was very fun to watch, I will say, overall. But when you have hard-fought battles like that and something just doesn't go your way, how do you rebound from that? What's going to be your plan coming back for the next race?
I don't know. I really needed this win because Jerry's gap to the championship is tending to be now very huge, like unrecoverable, I would say. And as we see, he doesn't make mistakes. I know it's a single multiplier race, so it wouldn't be a big difference. It would be only 3 points deficit. But now, instead of having these 3 points, he has basically opened it up again. And then with, I don't know, 8 rounds remaining or so, I don't know what's the answer to his pace, or I guess I have to tune it down, not push as much, and then hopefully see if something comes my way. But it's just a very, very, very tough competitor, because he just does not make any mistakes, and he has very similar pace as me, and that's what happens.
It's going to be interesting coming down through. Still plenty of races. And George, is there anyone you want to thank? Anyone you want to shout out before we let you go for the night?
I think that was a very, very good battle with Jerry. Shout out to him and the fair play that we had. I tried to be as clean as possible. Obviously, it didn't turn my way. I gave recuper my mistakes. It was nice to see John make it to the race, even though after surgery, and then hopefully the Amfield comes back strong into the hill climb next time, so we can have more people back.
Absolutely. And George, congratulations on the P2. It's a good race overall, and we will see you at the next one, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Zach, any final thoughts before we wrap this one up for the night?
It was absolutely fantastic to watch. I mean, I come into the VWSC very intermittently, it must be said. But every time I do, it's always a lot of fun. Obviously, historic cars, they sound great, they look great, they just are fantastic. I think it's so important to celebrate them, and even in the virtual world, drive them how they're supposed to be driven. I mean, we always say in the real world how much of a pity it is sometimes to see them just locked away in showrooms and things like that. But it's so great to see them out on track, racing hard, as they should be, because that's the way they want to be driven. That's the way we like seeing them driven, getting dirty, being used, and racing hard. And a very historic venue like this one, we showcased how good they are. The strategical MasterCard were absolutely fantastic. And, another step in what is going to be a long tail of this historic championship. It's been a pleasure alongside you as well. So it's been a very, very strong race. And hopefully the rest of the season will be emulating exactly what we saw here today in France.
Absolutely. And Zach, thanks for joining along here. And it's been great to have you along. Hopefully we'll get to see you more here in the VWSC. But of course, on behalf of James Parfit, behind the scenes, running the cameras, getting things going today, my name is Bradley Dalton, and we've taken you from start to finish. And be sure to join us here for the next one, because we'll take you from start to finish yet again.